Hello, I'm Mark Crutcher, President of Life Dynamics, and we want to welcome you to LifeTalk. And I'm joined by my usual suspects, Renee Hobbs, my assistant here at Life Dynamics.
Hello.
Hello, Renee. And Melissa Conway from Texas Right to Life.
Hello.
And Elizabeth McClung from Texas Right to Life.
Howdy.
How are you guys?
Good.
First off, as we do every week, we're going to take out a few minutes for Life in 120.
In the recent national elections, pro-life forces scored major victories in races all across the country. Now political commentators are pointing to Planned Parenthood as one of the biggest losers, noting that the abortion giant spent about $38 million on the Hillary Clinton campaign alone. Meanwhile, since the election, Donald Trump has reaffirmed his campaign pledge to only appoint justices to the Supreme Court who are pro-life. In Ohio, ambulatory surgical facilities, including abortion clinics, are mandated by state law to provide their patients with 24/7 emergency backup care. This is usually accomplished through an emergency transfer agreement with a nearby hospital. But when the abortion clinic operated by a notorious abortionist, Martin Haskell, was unable to comply with the requirement, the state gave him a 5-year exemption that allowed him to operate outside the law. Now state officials have apparently reconsidered and are saying that he must comply. Attorneys for the clinic claim that this would force them to close and are vowing to fight the ruling in court. Haskell is best known as the creator of the gruesome partial birth abortion procedure. In Washington, Barack Obama recently gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to longtime eugenicists and pro-abortion activists Bill and Melinda Gates. Working through the United Nations and the International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Gates Foundation has either donated or helped to raise several $100 million to promote pro-abortion efforts even in countries where it is illegal. The group has also pledged an additional $120 million to the Global Family Planning 2020 initiative. The Presidential Medal of Freedom is the highest honor the United States can bestow upon a citizen who is not a member of the U.S. military.
I think got a neat show here. We're going to have a really cool guest. Actually, a couple of guests here in a little bit. First off, I want to talk about this article, Renee, that we got the other day called The Myth of Abortion Regret. Mm-hmm. I know you read that article and had some
I did.
pretty strong comments
It actually infuriates me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because you talk to the women who are
Right.
on the other end of this deal that they just totally ignore.
Yeah.
But anyway, this article says The Myth of Abortion Regret. Women are certain about their decisions, more certain, in fact, than people getting knee surgery. So they're saying that women who have abortions are more certain about what they're doing than women who get knee surgery would be. I want to tell you what the big media bias thing is here in this article in a minute, but let's talk about the content for a second. You join with me all the time when we talk to these women that call in here. Is it just a myth that there are any women out there who regret their abortions?
The women that call us, even years and years and years later regret their abortion, every single one of them. And they say in this article that 95% of the women, even after 3 years, do not regret their abortion.
And that's
That's wrong.
That's right.
That's wrong.
It's not wrong. It's a lie.
Right.
It's an out-and-out lie, and they know that it's a lie.
Yes.
It takes more than an average of 3 years for a woman to speak publicly or to share with people who are close to her about her abortion.
But listen, I've got a call. There's been more than one, but I remember one in particular, and this was before you came to work here, of a woman who was in her car going home from the abortion clinic, called us near suicide. So sometimes it might take a long time, but it doesn't always. This is an obscenity that these people are putting this out to suggest that every woman who has an abortion is just tickled to death with you. It's like getting your hair cut or something.
Yeah, I mean, to say it's an easy decision and to take a life, to kill a life versus having knee surgery where you're not taking a life, it's...
I've never heard of anyone who committed suicide over knee surgery. One of the saddest cases, when I was writing Line 5, we came across a case of a 15-year-old girl in Chicago that had an abortion, and she committed suicide either that evening or the next evening by jumping in front of a train, a commuter train that was going by. She just stood right beside the tracks and stepped in front of it when it got close to her. 15 years old, she left a note at home in her bedroom saying she wanted to see her baby. She couldn't live with what she'd done, and she wanted to go see her baby. Turned out in the autopsy she was never pregnant. Mm-hmm. This is one of those deals where they do abortions on women who aren't pregnant, which is not an uncommon thing.
Right.
This 15-year-old girl was never pregnant, but killed herself because she wanted to go see her baby.
Well,
You know-
kind of on a side note, that's how Carol Everett came down.
Right.
Is because of doing abortions on people that weren't pregnant.
That's right, yeah.
And if women were actually certain about their abortion, there would be no hope. There would be no possibility for all of these prayer volunteers, for all these sidewalk counselors who stand in front of these abortion centers
That's right.
to intervene in the last few moments and to encourage her to change her mind and choose life. But we know that because women are not certain about their decision, we've seen thousands and thousands of women, thanks to fantastic prayerful movements like 40 Days for Life, we've seen thousands of women change their minds moments before going through with the procedure.
And very often, they'll change their minds over something that seems pretty inconsequential. It's not that hard to save a life. Sometimes you'll just tell them one little thing, because we've had women tell Renee and I that they were sitting in the waiting room of the abortion clinic hoping somebody would talk them out of it, hoping something would happen
Right.
that would cause them to change their mind. And if these people think that women are certain about their decisions, I challenge this collection of pathological liars to set up a video camera in the waiting room of an abortion clinic and look at the women sitting there, look at their faces, and tell me those women are all 100% certain about what they're doing, just as if they were having knee surgery. These people are liars.
And let us not forget, this is coming from the University of California in San
That's-
Francisco. So that states a lot right there with the funding that goes on with the Soros or whoever else to
Right.
bring in abortionists. And
That's the point I wanted to make about media bias. This story got picked up and repeated all over the country. Every newspaper we were seeing was having this, women don't regret their abortion. It's a myth that women ever regret their abortions. Not one media source pointed out what you just pointed out. This study was done by the University of San Francisco, one of the most rabid pro-abortion entities in America. This is the entity that Warren Buffett gives tens of millions of dollars every year. He's given billions to this school to train abortionists.
right.
Nobody ever mentioned any of that.
No, of
That this
course
study
not.
might have been a little bit biased
Right.
based on where it came from.
And these girls might have been paid off, some of them, to
They
do
may
the
not
study.
have even existed.
Right. Yeah,
But it was
that's
just
true.
another example of the obscene bias and the what we've talked about on previous shows, the fact that the American media has lost all credibility, has absolutely no credibility.
The media bias is so prevalent, but I'm just appalled at the thought of the language that they use, even just in the headline, to neutralize the act of killing a baby.
Right.
It's
Mind-boggling.
it's beyond comprehension.
It is. If you think I'm overreacting to this, imagine that, let's say Liberty University came out with a study saying that 90% of women do regret their abortions. First off, that story would not be picked up and repeated in all these other newspapers to begin with. But even if it were, do you think that they might say, oh, by the way, Liberty University was started by, Pat Robertson, and it was a part of the 700 Club, and it's this, that, and the other, and it's a Christian organization, and they probably have a bias on the abortion issue, and they would go to somebody on the pro-abortion side and who would say, well, sure, Liberty University is going to say that. They don't have anything to back it up with, but they're a biased organization. That was not done with the University of California at San Francisco, despite the fact that this is where all these abortionists are getting trained, and they're taking all this money from Warren Buffett, hundreds of millions of dollars. We talked about it when I wrote Siege. We did some research. Wasn't he saying he was paying between $50 and $100 million a year to University of San Francisco?
Yeah.
University of California at San Francisco.
Something like that.
It was $50 to $100 million a year for them to recruit and train abortionists. But that was never mentioned. They just reported the story like it was hard news. The American media today wouldn't know hard news if it, well,
No, this isn't hard news. This is drip, drip, drip marketing to dehumanize the baby and
Well,
to make it commonplace.
let's talk
abortion
about
is.
some real victories we're having, and that's in the black community. We set out several years ago to try to activate the black community into the pro-life movement. It is working. The pro-life movement is becoming much more inclusive of African Americans. They're coming into the pro-life movement numbers. We've never seen anything like it before. And before we get into that, and we're going to have a special guest here in a minute to talk about it, we've started what we call fast-forward videos, which are real short videos designed for the internet and to take advantage of the fact that people have short attention spans nowadays. This is our second one in this series of fast-forward videos, and it deals with this issue. Let's watch this real quick.
Every week, about 3,250 African Americans die from heart disease, cancer, strokes, or diabetes. That's how many beads are in this jar. Another 750 die from respiratory failure, kidney and liver disease, septic infections, Alzheimer's, flu, or pneumonia. And 460 will be murdered, commit suicide, or die in accidents. But during that same week, this many will be killed by abortion. That's 5,700 African Americans killed every week. The reality is, abortion was legalized to be an instrument of Black genocide, and it's working. Right now, Planned Parenthood operates the largest chain of abortion clinics in the United States. Their facilities have been disproportionately placed in our communities, and in less than a week, they kill more of our people than the Ku Klux Klan killed in the last 150 years. In fact, there are now parts of America where more Black babies are aborted than are born. At this point, the only question we need to answer is, how much longer are we going to tolerate this?
You know, that's going to be something we can use
Yeah.
for a long time
Right.
because this
Can we say powerful?
powerful.
It just
Very
puts things into
powerful.
perspective.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, you're right. It puts things in perspective when you're starting to saying, here's 4,374 Blacks that die every week from all these causes. All of these.
Right,
5,700 die every week from abortion alone.
right.
That starts to put things into a little bit better perspective, which is what we're intending for this video to do.
Yes.
We need to bring people up to date on MAFA 21. It still continues to have an enormous impact, and is still bringing in African Americans in droves.
What's the distribution at right now?
Right at 200,000. We thought at the beginning we'd be lucky, and our guest, Clenard Childress, was here in the meeting when we talked about this. We thought we would consider it a victory if we could put out 10,000 MAFAs. That's what we initially were shooting for. We've so far put out, we're either right at 200,000 or right over 200,000. We're about out of them again. We're going to have to, when we're out of those that we've got right now, we'll be well over 200,000.
Yes.
The reason we don't know exactly is because one time they had a mix-up on them, and the people that replicate the videos made a mistake, and they had to destroy a bunch of them, and they repeated and gave us some free ones to make up for that. So I don't know how many free ones they gave us, but we've bought 200,000.
Yeah, and not to mention people that dupe them or
Right.
that YouTube, whatever.
Duplicate them on their own.
Yeah.
And yeah, all the millions of people. We went on, we just did a little quick search on all these people that have put MAFA online on their websites. A lot of them have been pulled down, but have put them up there. And closest we could figure, 500,000 people had watched it online. So the numbers are pretty staggering. Right now, I want to bring somebody into the show who was actually in MAFA 21, and he's going to give us an update on some of the things he's seeing out on the streets. His name is Clenard Childress. He joins us from New Jersey. Hello, Clenard.
Hey, how's it going, Mark?
Just fine, sir. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Just
Great.
getting back from a couple of great events and excited to share that with you.
Yeah. First off, you've been going to the NAACP conventions for years, giving out MAFA 21 to people there and talking about the issue of Black genocide. And the other day when I talked to you, you said that the response that you're getting is a lot less hostile and a lot more encouraging than what you've seen in past years.
Far more receptive than ever, and it did my heart good, and they are asking more questions. They're realizing also that this is being censored. So I think that's the real blessing of the conversations and exchanges I did have. And these are with delegates. Now, of course, they're still fearful of the executive board, but the consciousness of the people is certainly being raised, and it's because of the grassroots that everyone is doing on this issue that it's far more palatable to them to discuss it and to realize that there's something has to be done. So this was the best NAACP demonstration that we've done as far as people receiving the information and being willing to discuss it.
I don't know if it was you or Johnny Hunter told me that you actually even had an attorney for the NAACP that had been hostile to you guys in past years actually came out and got a copy and watched it and was very receptive. Was that you or was that Johnny?
Well, we both talked to attorneys. I have a good friend I went to college with who's an attorney and a president of the Camden chapter here in New Jersey, and he watched it and had me come down and address the Camden board of the NAACP, and I discussed my issues with the joint board of the national board, but to have him recognize that there has to be a discussion on this and something has to be done is monumental.
Wow, that's great. And then we also had an event in D.C. with the opening of this new museum. What can you tell us about that?
Well, we started at the Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian. And, of course, I'm also working on the efforts of other people who are bringing attention to the fact that Margaret Sanger is even in the proximity of Martin Luther King, her bust. And in the age of political correctness and racial sensitivity, to exalt a blatant racist in the Portrait Gallery and attempt to basically express to those who come in that this is something notable and a person of honor is despicable. And it's all this subterfuge, this subliminal education that is being given to our young people especially to embrace quote-unquote reproductive rights, which is really eugenics, and have it as a viable means of their decision-making process when it should be totally eradicated. So we were there for a while. Then we marched down to the African American Museum. Of course, it had just been opened September 24th. The president cut the ribbon, and I think I'm going to check it out. We had the privilege of being the first protest, hopefully, but people didn't know why. They first thought we were celebrating, and then they saw the signs we were carrying, the literature that we were handing out. The fact of the matter is there's 20 million people missing directly due to abortion out of the African American community. There is no mention of eugenics and no mention of Planned Parenthood as an institution that has preyed upon the African American community. They refuse even to mention it. So how can you have an institution that is directly responsible for 20 million people missing and not make mention of it? It would be like the Jews not mentioning the Holocaust. So we are holding them accountable until there is proper representation of eugenics that has been perpetrated against African Americans. And certainly if there's any place that should be shown and seen is in the African American Museum.
And this is the brand new museum that's on the mall there, right?
It is, and it's very sad that it's being used basically as a political means of indoctrination and once again, subliminal suggestion that abortion is fine, eugenics is fine, the African American community is the target, yet the African American community and the African American president chose not to represent it.
Wow.
So this is sad, but we're not going to let it go. And once again, very well received when they found out that there was a part of history purposely being censored, and they wanted to know some of the facts. We had white students as well as black students come up to us and said, how come that's not taught?
Wow.
And that's shocking because we're so engrossed in it, we still don't realize that they have basically control of most of the college campuses and the educational system. And this is a part of history that is not being exposed or shared or talked about. And when it is, it's tainted. And so we have to recognize our job is crucial,
right,
of having people come to the knowledge of the truth and then decide, is this what you want in your society?
Well, we wanted to bring the audience up to date and let them understand that there is still tremendous things that are going on in the African American community as a result of the things that you guys are doing and getting them off a 21 message out there. I think it's going to accelerate as soon as Obama's out of office because so many blacks...
It's accelerating now.
It's accelerating already.
Because they know he's leaving. And
right.
They feel no obligation now to defend his position on the issues.
Well, they don't feel disloyal.
Right.
Right.
So it's beginning now. And if we weren't sowing those seeds, we would not be prepared for this time.
Well, that's
And
right.
So our diligence during a very oppressive administration when it comes to our message, we were faithful in sowing. And now I believe those seeds are going to be watered. I have friends now just seeing my Alpha 21. I just think it's a season for it to bloom and to be really a cornerstone when it comes to the education of the African American community.
I think you're right.
And it has unquestionably been a blessing, but I think we haven't seen the total overflow from it yet.
I think you're right, and I appreciate the help that you're giving with the MAAFA project, because we can't do it here. We've talked about this many times. I've told you this many times. We can't do it from here in Denton, Texas. We got to have you guys out there on the streets and in the field doing the work. We just provide the material. So I appreciate what you guys are doing, and you keep up the good work.
We appreciate what you've done and the sacrifices you made, and it's time for us to really bring it home now. I mean, we have to accept every engagement, be in the public square every time we can, and it's surfacing now.
That's right.
The conversations are far more easier, and they're shook. They're very shook by the powers that be that this is surfacing now, and people are beginning to digest this, and hopefully it will bring about a cultural change.
It is going to do that. Thanks, Clenard. We appreciate your joining us today.
God bless you.
Bye-bye, sir.
Bye-bye now.
It's really neat to see what these guys are doing out there on the streets. And again, we couldn't do it. MAAFA would not be the success that it has been. And it has, by the way, been far and away the most successful project Life Dynamics has ever done. And it would not be successful without these people out on the streets. And speaking of that, we've got another guest. Terry Beatley is joining us. Now, she's got a new book out in which MAAFA plays a pretty big role. But she also had an interesting confrontation not too long ago. Terry, hello. How are you?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great. Glad to be back on your show.
Nice to have you back again. Tell us, first off, a little bit about your new book.
People can find it at www.abortionking.com. And my new book is called What If We've Been Wrong? Keeping My Promise to America's Abortion King. Back in 2009, I had the awesome opportunity to interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was America's abortion king, the father of America's abortion industry. He co-founded NARAL, which is now known NARAL, Pro-Choice America. And at the end of the interview, I made Dr. Nathanson a promise that if he had a message for America, to deliver it across our country, as well as, he said, to instruct people on the 8-point strategy of how he deceived our country. And I shook his hand, and I promised him I'm not going to stop until the country knows or until Roe v. Wade is overturned. And MAAFA 21 will play a major role in overturning Roe v. Wade.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your saying so. Now, We'll put the website up on the screen for people to go and get your book. But you called the other day, and you were telling me an interesting story about a confrontation you had, and I thought people might be interested to hear about it and what environment that was in. And if you can just take a couple of minutes, we're just about out of time, but if you can take a couple of minutes and tell us about that, I think people will find that very interesting.
Oh, sure. I had the opportunity to go to the vice presidential debate between Mike Pence and Tim Kaine down in Farmville, Virginia, and I had a pass to get back into the media spin room after the debate. And, I was back there meeting lots of people, and I turned around, and there was Reverend Jesse Jackson about 12, 15 feet away. And I didn't think twice. I mean, literally, it was like a split-second decision. It's like, oh, I need to go ask him an important question. So he had his back to me, and I said, Reverend Jackson, and he spun around and reached out my hand. And I said, hey, I'm Terry Beatley, president of Hosea Initiative, and I have a question for you. I said, about 30 years ago, you used to actively expose Margaret Sanger's racist population control plan called Planned Parenthood's Negro Project. And I said, today it's killing more African Americans than all diseases, homicides, accidents, and, of course, all those police shootings added together. And I said, I just want to know, sir, how come you no longer expose Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood's racist population control plan that's being executed via abortion? He wouldn't look at me. When I ended with the question, he turned his head, looked at me, and we kind of locked eyes for about 4 seconds, and it was dead silence. And I knew right then he has no legitimate answer, and he couldn't come up with one. He gave me a mock answer by saying, well, I need to go to this radio or TV interview, but you stay right here, and I'm going to come back, because I really do want to answer that. And I thought, no, you don't. And so he was speechless. And, of course, the entire time I'm remembering that excellent segment you have on MAFA about how Jesse Jackson, when he ran for president, what was it, back in 1984?
Mm-hmm.
So up until that point, he was very vocal about black genocide. And then because there's no room for a pro-life person, inside the Democrat Party anymore, bottom line, he knew I'd caught him in exactly what's been happening. It's called selling out to the abortion industry. Tim Kaine's done the same thing. And, of course, Hillary Clinton, she never was on the pro-life side.
Right.
So.
Well, up to 82 or 84, he had some really, really strong pro-life arguments. And, I mean, I understand that he was sold out to politics and, he was trying to run for president and all of that. But I can't, it's amazing. And he's also a product of an almost abortion here. So he understands better than most of us what was going on, what was happening, what abortion is about. I don't know. It just boggles my mind. And he's doing the legwork for Margaret Sanger here. Margaret Sanger asked the pastors to go out and speak to their congregation, and he's doing just that.
Doing just that. They're on track to exterminate the black race in America. And I think more than anything, it just shows man's brokenness. We're fallen. It's about power, prestige, privilege, and position. And Jesse Jackson is exemplifying that. He's putting politics, he's putting his position, he's putting all the money. And so until the heart gets changed.
When you look at him, you see somebody that looks very sad. I don't know if y'all have ever noticed that. He
looked very sad that day.
He looks like the saddest person I've ever seen. Just look at him next time you see him with that context. And he is the saddest looking person. And I think he knows he sold his soul.
Well, that is what was striking me as I stood there in front of him, because I'm looking up at his face. He was choosing to look away.
Terry, we're out of time, but let me ask you something. After he did this television or radio interview that he said he had to go do and would come right back, did he come back?
No. I was right across the room, and I was one of the few with a red jacket on, so he could have scoped me out. Yeah.
I could have told you the minute he walked away that he was never coming back, and you could have done the same thing.
Well, that's why I walked away, because I knew he wasn't going to be walking back. There is no question in my mind. Reverend Jesse Jackson knows he is an accomplice to the annihilation of the black race. He knows it, and what he has to do is figure out what's more important, money and prestige, or speaking out for the truth.
Well, we're totally out of time, but let me tell you one little quick story, and then we've got to go. When we were doing my Alpha 21 research, we came across something that I'd never heard about, which was back during slavery, there were instances where slaves got their freedom. Either they were, whoever owned them set them free or whatever, by some method or another, they got their freedom, and then went out and bought slaves themselves. They went out and bought slaves. As a matter of fact, I didn't know anything about it, and I asked Johnny Hunter about it one time, and he knew some of the names of them, and he said, one of the worst slave owners in North Carolina was a black guy who had been a slave once before, and when he got free, he wanted to make money, so he went out and bought some slaves and went into business himself.
Power.
Let me tell you something. Jesse Jackson is the modern day equivalent of that. That's what Jesse Jackson is. He sold his soul for political power and for money and for prestige. That's what he did, and that's who he is today. He's no different than those guys that did that. But anyway, thanks for joining us, Terry, and we hope your book goes well. And
oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Terry.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, that's a good show, but it is good to know that we're making this progress that we set out to make, back in 2009 with Ma'afa, that it's actually showing fruit, because it could have flopped. I mean, we didn't know.
Right.
But God had plans for it, and we're just the vessel or the instrument that carries out those plans. And that's the formula for the whole pro-life movement to follow. This is God's battle. He's going to fight it. He's going to win it. He's already promised us a victory. We only have one thing to do our duty. Wherever he places us to fight, we do our duty right there. He sees the big picture. So anyway, thanks guys. We'll see you next week. That's all the time we have. Until next week, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight. We're here to win, because winning is how the killing stops.